Welcome to the RX Rated Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Jeffrey Winger, and with me, as always, is Dr. Maurice Robinson, and we got some spicy topics for you today. How are you this fine evening, sir?
I can't complain. I've noticed since I left retail, I never have too many complaints. It's always okay when we do our podcast now versus like me venting for 15, 20 minutes before we even get started.
Well, I'm super excited about tonight because these are some topics I think the listeners will thoroughly enjoy. So let's just get right to it. You had sent me this story. I didn't even know about this until you sent it to me, but apparently there was a huge case that went on for 4.5 years in Nashville, Tennessee, about an ex-nurse. I think her name was Radonda Vaught, V-A-U-G-H-T, 38 years old. And she was found guilty ultimately on 2 charges in the death of a patient. And I guess this caught the nation's attention. I was out of the loop. But the 2 charges were criminally negligent, reckless homicide. That sounds terrible. And abuse of an impaired adult. So bottom line is she made a med error, which caused the death of a patient back in 2017. It's just now getting resolved. The patient was Charlene Murphy. She was 75 years old. So I read the article, and they said that the jury deliberated for 4 hours, took them 4 hours. And like I said, the trial was closely watched by nurses and medical professionals from all across the country. And I guess in the courtroom, in the gallery, nurses watched, they came from all around. They were even wearing their scrubs, a lot of them. And here's what happened. The nurse gave Murphy, the patient, becuronium, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, which is the generic name for Norcuron, instead of Versed, which is a sedative. The becuronium is an anesthetic that provides skeletal muscle relaxation during surgery, or if you're getting ventilated mechanically. And so the patient stopped breathing. Later in the article, they mentioned cardiac arrest. So I'm not sure what actually happened to the patient, but she died. That was the bottom line. And
I know it's I think it's part of a 3-drug cocktail when they use it for lethal injection. So.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Oh, Jesus Christ. That's horrible. So the thing I found fascinating about this, because anyone who's listened to the show faithfully knows I have not the most favorable opinion of nurses. So the article said that the nurses were, quote, quietly animated in the courtroom gallery. I don't know what quietly animated means. I guess they weren't making any sounds, but their hands were flailing or something. I don't know. And then the article specifies a particular nurse. Some, like Rebecca Ray, spent her time crocheting a blanket. Now, can you imagine this? You're up in the gallery, you're crocheting a blanket during the proceedings. Now, here's my favorite part of the entire article. Here's a direct quote from Rebecca Ray, crochet expert. She came in innocent, and she will leave innocent no matter what the jury says. Did you catch that in the article?
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
I guess no matter what, in their eyes, she'll always be innocent, because how often, when someone makes a mistake, are they charged? I don't know, especially when I think Vanderbilt, I don't even think they reported it. I think when they documented it, they did it as an accident. Like she died of natural causes, and they didn't report it to the state. It wasn't until like a year later that they got like an anonymous tip that this even came back up. So
I love that sort of Yenta thinking. Like, isn't that why we have a judicial system? Isn't that why we have a jury of our peers and a judge and lawyers? Like, I just love, like, no matter what happens, I think she's innocent. And like, well, what about the arguments that the prosecution made? Can you rebut them in any specific way? Or your mind is set and that's it. No matter what happens, she's innocent. I just love that kind of mentality. But I know she didn't. Well, go ahead.
You think they had that, like, the truck driver that killed those people? All the other truck drivers were like, I don't think they thought that he was completely innocent, but the punishment was way too harsh.
I hesitate to say this, but that sounds like chick think. I know I'm going to get a shit ton of comments, but that's chick think. Anyway, they quoted saying that, you know, she didn't intend to kill the patient, but made a knowing choice. This was in the closing arguments. She consciously disregarded warnings and risks when pulling the wrong medication from an electronic dispensing cabinet that required her to search for the drug by name. And they said, quote, there were multiple chances for her to just pay attention. So apparently she cut corners and sort of circumvented the system, and that's what led to this error, which makes me lose a little sympathy for her, because we've all been there. Every medical professional screws up at some point. But it sounds like she knowingly and willingly kind of went around the checks and balances system, and now the patient is dead. Now, I got another question for you. Did you see the pics in the article? They showed a pic of her during the verdict readings. She's standing there with her lawyer. Does she look remorseful to you in that pic?
She just looked, I don't know if it was a state of shock. I don't want to say she was like, she looked whatever to me, but I think she's just, because this was back in 2017. I guess
that's true. It took a long time for this to come to a resolution.
A lot weighing on her, and she's just like, whatever the verdict.
Yeah, she's just happy it's over. Yeah, she said that. Here's a direct quote. I am just relieved that this portion of the process is over, she told reporters. I hope that they, you know, the patient's family, are also just as relieved to be moving away from this process. Maybe a poor choice of words. They'd probably be more relieved if their family member hadn't been killed by your mistake. But the assistant district attorney, Debbie Housel, had to reassure everyone that this was just about one person, not the entire nursing community. I guess nurses are super sensitive. Like if you go after one of them, they feel like it's an attack on all of them. Kind of like police officers. Like, okay, one cop did something egregious. We shouldn't besmirch all cops. Doesn't the same principle apply here? I wonder if these nurses would agree with that principle. But the prosecutor said, look, we prosecute on the facts. The DA's office doesn't prosecute on lies. Okay, that's good. That sounds like common sense. But the nurses in the gallery clearly disagreed. Her defense attorney, Styrese, people have the oddest names, said that she was a scapegoat. That was a direct quote. She was a scapegoat. Now, I looked up the definition of a scapegoat. A scapegoat is a person who is blamed for the wrongdoings, mistakes, and faults of others. Okay, so who was she blamed for someone else's mistakes? Nobody, as far as it was her mistake. So that doesn't make any sense. She wasn't a scapegoat. There wasn't like someone else made the error and she took the fall. No, this was her error. And she was stripped of her license. And like you said, the Tennessee board initially chose not to investigate the death. And I guess the family of the deceased victim had to call for it. That's alarming, isn't it?
Yeah, because I think the university didn't report it, or they reported it that she died not by a drug med error, but like natural causes. So it just kind of went unnoticed. They didn't do the proper steps that you are supposed to take if something like this happens. It is kind of crazy though. When I was like Googling it, actually a picture of the drug popped up, and I guess it has a red cap that says was it paralytic agent or paralyzing agent or something on it, and even on the front it says paralyzing agent, and I think it has to be reconstituted.
Oh my God.
Whereas midazolam doesn't. So like that would be like, to me, someone asks for a flu shot and I'm just grabbing shingle shot and I'm still just reconstituting it. Like, I mean, I feel like that would, let you know that you're doing something wrong when you normally don't have to reconstitute, but it's kind of hard to say. I know sometimes you get in the routine, especially in retail, you get those stupid DURs that keep popping up, those drug interactions that
just disregard them.
You override, and then something really serious pops up, but you're just in such a habit of overriding that it just, you have to sometimes have to go back, like, well, that was a serious one, let me go back.
Yeah, exactly, because so many of them are frivolous. Yeah, exactly. And then you're like, oh wait, that was a serious one. Yeah,
that's why I could get where she was just overriding those. The fact that she actually had to reconstitute, you have to reconstitute this drug. Like I said, that makes me kind of think, because I don't think I would accidentally give somebody shingle shot when they wanted the flu, especially when I actually take the time to reconstitute
Yeah.
it. But
and I'm glad the family pressed for this. Like, imagine how many families just sort of are too meek to pursue it and let it go. Like, how many nurses have gotten away with stuff like this where the Tennessee board like didn't want to investigate. Like, that's kind of scary. And then the American Nurses Association is worried that the trial could set a precedent discouraging nurses from reporting errors and thus hinder patient safety. Patient safety, like the woman that was killed by this nurse. Like, that's what you're worried about? Like, that didn't make any sense to me. Now, here's the worst part. The sentencing is not going to happen until mid-May. I love how fast our judicial system works. First of all, the case took 4.5 years or some ridiculous thing. Now, even though it's over, the sentencing is not going to happen until mid-May. Like, why is it going to take the judge so long to sentence her?
when I saw that, I kind of wondered if COVID had to play a role in just delaying. I don't know. Court, you can't get everybody in the same room to deliberate. That was the only thing I could think about. I did think that was a long time, but I do kind of feel that if she goes to jail, like something should happen to Vanderbilt, because they just basically tried to cover it up. They didn't do the proper reporting, and to not document. Because can you imagine a retail pharmacy if somebody died from a med error and corporate found out that you didn't put in like the STARS event? Like, you would be crucified.
Yeah. Well, here was Vought's final words, the nurse. I don't think that the takeaway message here is not to be honest and truthful. You guys do what you do it well. Don't let this defeat you mentally. Keep your standards. Aren't her lax standards the cause of all of this? And why would this defeat them mentally? I don't understand her closing arguments. I know she's trying to be magnanimous, but I didn't get what she was trying to say. Did that make any sense to you?
No, not really.
Anyway,
I think kind of what I took from this is, like, she did make a mistake. She was honest and, admitted to it right away and did everything that she could. She probably thought after a year that this was just over with, but when it came back, the university then realizing that they didn't properly report it kind of threw her under the bus. So it's if you work in retail pharmacy, that's why it's always, you gotta cover yourself, because if something that happens where somebody dies, company's definitely gonna throw you under the bus. And I guess what's different than retail, I think retail might be even more dangerous, because I've seen a lot of mistakes that, a lot of times the customer can actually see the drug, so they bring it back and say, oh, this isn't the right medicine, it looked different, or the pill was a different color. They catch a lot of the mistakes. If the customers were kind of like this lady and couldn't, just solely depended on us, I think there'd be a lot more mistakes that were fatal. But a lot of times the patient catches it because the vial or the pills look a little different.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens in mid-May when she finally gets sentenced, and hopefully the nurses around the country won't have a hissy fit.